every week gets madder. And, well, this week's been no different. I see all these protests on behalf of Black Lives Matter, which is a most blatant front and indeed funded by the 1%. And I just wonder where they all were during the fascistic lockdowns or the extremes of them, because lockdown's still there in its many and various forms. Where were they then? They were sitting at home doing what the authorities told them, the very authorities that they're now protesting against. It's a rather strange phenomenon, but not really, I suppose, if you go deeper into it, because the common denominator is doing what the 1% wants. And so the 1% wanted lockdown, and the 1% now wants these protests and these associated lootings and thuggery. And there was a quote I came across from a journalist on the New Yorker called Jane Mayer, who said that for the 1% to win control of America, they had to rebrand themselves as basically the voice and the promoters of the other 99%, and that is exactly what is happening. I'll give you the exact quote. If the 1% wanted to win control of America, they needed to rebrand themselves as the champions of the other 99%. And this is what is happening. You've got these organizations that call themselves progressive and anti-racist, and yet they're funded, thus controlled, by 1% corporations, 1% billionaires, 1% foundations, with Soros in there constantly, but others too. And Black Lives Matter is funded by these people. So, of course, it's not what it seems. That's why I call it Black Lives Manipulated, which I think is far more appropriate. And so we have this situation whereby the people who overwhelmingly believe, although of course the inner core knows the score, but overwhelmingly peopled and promoted and supported by people who are doing the bidding of the very people they think they're opposing. And it's a shocker, really, when you see how people are so easy to manipulate. And this happens when people get their information only from the mainstream, because, of course, the mainstream media, which is owned by the 1%, not least in America with CNN and MSNBC and so on, is absolutely pushing these protests and what's going on. And it's reached the point now where around 6 blocks of Seattle have been declared another country called Chaz, whereby the groups of protesters, actually Black Lives Matter and Antifa are running it, have taken over 6 blocks of Seattle, including a whole police precinct, and the government of Seattle has just let them do it and told the police not to go in there. So what you have is mob rule. And of course, what is happening is the same that always happens. The those that are now controlling this Chaz separate country in Seattle have armed border guards. Now, I thought the woke mentality was to open all borders. This is the reason why the George Soros vehicle for transforming society is called the Open Society Foundations. They want open borders. But when they're running this situation in Seattle, they don't have open borders in the sense that they've got armed border guards. And it's not a safe place to go, it would seem, if you have a different opinion to those running the show. They also have their own violent law enforcement, their law, while calling for the police to be defunded. And business owners are saying that they are being extorted. They're suffering from an extortion racket in which they're being told to pay for the right to sell within the new country of Chaz. That's why I keep saying it's not about race. It's about control. And it's not about race. It's about mentality. And whenever people with a desire for power over get power over, they act in exactly the same way. So let's replace rule by the system with rule by the mob. And the system's controlled by the 1%, and the mob is controlled by the 1%. It's extraordinary how utterly blatant and transparent it is to anyone with a brain in working order, but so many can't see it. And so this is now going worldwide. Protests in Britain and protests in other European countries supporting Black Lives Matter, which is an organization funded and controlled by the 1% they're protesting against. It is extraordinary to watch. And one of the phenomena of these protests is pulling down statues and monuments relating to history and people from history. So if and of course all these people in the who are pulling the statues down and pulling the monuments down, they live absolutely perfect lives. They are extraordinary. I mean, how can you be so pure as they are? So they look at if there's anything in a person's life that's not very pleasant in what they've done. They may have done many good things, but they will have done some bad things as well. So what we're going to do is we're going to pull them down. And I don't quote the Bible very much, but let he who hath no sin cast the first stone is a stunning line. And that's what we're looking at now. So, Gaz, my son, was absolutely right when he said, instead of pulling these statues down and these monuments, just put a plaque on them that tells the truth, all the truth. Say the money that they gave to the local community, but also, which is why often the statues are up there, but also their involvement in slavery or their involvement in other things that weren't very pleasant. Just let history be told, warts and all. But instead, they're wiping out history. They're doing it in America. They've been doing it for a while in America. And this is straight out of the pages of Orwell's 1984 and is encapsulated by his quote in the book, who controls the past controls the future, and who controls the present controls the past. And what he was talking about was the present rewriting history to give a totally misrepresented account of the past, which leads to a total misrepresentation of the present and how we got here. The whole idea is that we learn the lessons of history. If you delete them, you cannot learn those lessons. And this is one major reason, in fact, the foundation reason, why the almost unimaginable scale of human slaughter in the name of communism, fascism, but especially communism, Marxism, is so played down in the education system and elsewhere. It's because when they are trying to, or in the process of moving us into a post-revolutionary Marxist world run by AI, which makes it a Marxist technocracy, you don't want it widely known that Marxism has cost at least 100 million lives. You don't want the people to know that. So what you do is you do everything you can to delete that from the knowledge of especially the young who you are using to bring about your post-revolutionary Marxist technocracy. And the more that you delete history, as Orwell well understood, the more that you create a blank sheet of paper in the present to impose, manipulate perceptions of reality on the population that have no balancing mechanism that comes with knowing what has happened in the past when what is suggested in the present happened. You want to do this, look what happened here, and look what happened the last time. They want to remove that. This is why the history is being removed, as it was in the world of 1984. And we have a situation where people like Martin Luther King, who led a overwhelmingly non-violent campaign against institutionalized racism and segregation, is being marginalized now and pushed aside. We have a situation where the University of California is investigating a lecturer for teaching Martin Luther King's letter from a Birmingham jail, because he read the letter to his students and used the quote N-word. Why? Because that was in the letter. And now he's facing this investigation because of it. And as one commenter on this news story about the lecturer asked, does this mean we have to remove Dr. King's statue? Where does it end? Well, it does end, on its way to the end anyway, in removing statues of people like Martin Luther King. Because they were preaching nonviolent resistance, which actually worked, as Gandhi also promoted in his life. But that's not what the 1% want. They don't want non-violent, non-cooperation, because that'll bring them down. What they want is division. As Martin Luther King preached unity between races, Antifa and Black Lives Matter, owned by the 1%, are preaching division. We have a situation in this Chaz area of Seattle, which is now occupied and run by these people, where they're calling for black people to be treated medically only by black people. They're calling for segregation. And what does the 1% want? To divide and rule everybody. Because that's how the few control the many. And this is how crazy it gets. We have a group of doctors, about 1,000. Just grabbed a piece of paper here with this letter on. About 1,000 health professionals. And as I spoke about last week, there is this, of course, we're drowning in contradictions, but this particular contradiction is that we were told that the virus was deadly, and so we had to stay at home, and anyone that went out when they shouldn't was killing people. Anyone who protested against the lockdowns was killing people. And then overnight, literally overnight, that all changed when these protests began, and these protests were okay. Virus was okay with these protests. So we have a woke virus that will leave you alone if you protest for Black Lives Matter, owned by the 1%, but will sort you out if you protest against the lockdowns perpetrated by the 1%. And this letter, which this 1,000 health professionals, it says, signed, saying don't shut down protests using coronavirus concerns as an excuse, it ought to be an historical document, because it reveals in crystal clear terms the insanity of the woke mind, which is what it's been designed to be. So here we go, strap in. A group of health and medical colleagues has penned an open letter to express their concern that protests around the United States could be shut down under the guise of coronavirus health concerns. Quote, "We wanted to present a narrative that prioritizes opposition to racism as vital to the public health, including the epidemic response. We believe that the way forward is not to suppress protests in the name of public health, but to respond to protesters' demands in the name of public health, thereby addressing multiple public health crises. If ever I've read a paragraph that was disappearing up its own backside, then that is it. Somehow, uh, people protesting without social distancing is suddenly okay. And I say it is because I say there's no virus, but the authorities say there is and it's deadly. It's okay to protest shoulder to shoulder if you're protesting for Black Lives Matter, owned by the 1%, because that addresses health concerns. Funny, I never heard that over these months of lockdown before, but it goes on. Uh, it needs a torch by now because of where it's gone. As public health advocates, we do not condemn these gatherings as risky for COVID-19 transmission. We support them as vital to the national public health and to the threatened health specifically of Black people in the United States. We can show that support by facilitating safest protest practicing and without distracting from demonstrators' ability to gather and demand change. Well, I've not seen any evidence of that because people are just standing shoulder to shoulder. No social distancing at all. And like I say, I have no problem with that. But the hypocrisy from the authorities is extraordinary, and these people is extraordinary. They also claim that Black and minorities are more susceptible to this quote virus than white people. Now, that's not surprising given where we were leading to present time. Everything is racist, including the virus, when it's not woke. So surely lots and lots of Black people standing shoulder to shoulder protesting in the streets is more dangerous to Black people, according to these people, than anyone else. But all this goes out of the window because it's not about health. It never has been. It's about promoting an agenda. And when the agenda benefits here, you say one thing. And when the agenda benefits here, you say another thing. And this letter is just an encapsulation of that. Because it then says that while the Black Lives Matter protest should be allowed and not a problem with the virus, it says this should not be confused with a permissive stance on all gatherings, particularly protests against stay-at-home orders. So what you have is this in-your-face manipulation of information to justify an agenda in the sense of the virus is no problem if you protest for Black Lives Matter, and to justify the same agenda in the sense of, oh, but it is dangerous if you protest against the lockdowns. And still, vast numbers of people cannot see it.